The United States is changing the way it operates in space. Territory that was once largely monopolized by NASA has slowly been ceded to the private sector. Like all good corporations, these companies are armed with slick promotional videos.
3, 2, 1.
And their excellent PR machines are generating hours of airtime.
Well, I think we could probably send the first person in about 12 years.
Wow. And mostly positive news reports.
It's going to be an incredibly exciting year.
I know we're very, very happy to be a part of this project.
But there seems to be a lack of some fundamental questions. How has this all come about? And what does the future hold if corporations, who hope to generate huge profits, hold the key to the final frontier?
In the spring of 1961, the United States is locked in this very desperate struggle with the Soviet Union over the Cold War. And it's really a battle over the economic and political systems that are going to rule the world.
On April 12, 1961, Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin broke through Earth's atmosphere, delivering a body blow to U.S. dominance in science.
And no nation which expects to be the leader of other nations can expect to stay behind in this race for space. And we have vowed that we shall not see it governed by a hostile flag of conquest, but by a banner of freedom and peace. We choose to go to the moon.
Think how ridiculous that had to sound to the rest of the world, because we had not yet put a single person into orbit. 500 years from now, in my opinion, there's only going to be one thing that they remember about the 20th century. That's that man went to the moon.
Stand by. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
It really wasn't of significance who got to the moon first.
So you don't really see the landing on the moon as a great nationalistic achievement by the United States?
There's no question it's a great propaganda achievement, but if you actually think of the military significance, it was not of any consequence.
We went to the moon for geopolitical purposes. And absent the Cold War environment of 1961, there's probably no president who would have committed the kind of resources that the U.S. committed to this effort.
Space has always been in play in terms of global politics and war and so forth, usually in an exaggerated, fear-mongering way.
Maybe we weren't doing it just to explore. Maybe we were doing it just to show that we could crush our enemies from space. And that's a very dark view of government space travel, but it's always been part of government-controlled space travel.
At the time of the Apollo missions, NASA was receiving over 5% of the U.S. federal budget. In 2013, it was less than half of 1%.
4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
And the agency's prestige has declined with that funding. In spite of its major achievements, it's NASA's failures that have grabbed America's attention.
Engines throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go with throttle up. Challenger, go with throttle up.
Both Challenger and Columbia suggested that the management system and the safety culture at NASA was flawed.
Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction.
After Columbia, it meant that we really needed to think about moving on.
NASA retired the Space Shuttle in 2011. The program deemed too expensive. It also meant that the U.S. government could no longer consider itself a gatekeeper to space travel.
We are now in a very uncomfortable position of relying on the Russians, to fly our people to the space station.
The writing was on the wall. In 2001, Dennis Tito, a wealthy U.S. businessman, went against NASA's wishes and paid $20 million to hitch a ride on a Russian rocket to the International Space Station. Tito's launch was a shot heard around the world by entrepreneurs with deep pockets and cosmic ambitions. Suddenly, access to space was available to anyone at a price.
You're looking good.
It was now a commercial, not a national interest. Quickly, NASA got on board, and outsourcing became the name of the game. NASA now has an $800 million program to develop the commercial space market. It's still taxpayer money, but the contracts have gone to private companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, Sierra Nevada, and Orbital Sciences. None of these companies are shy about communicating their mission statements and accomplishments. SpaceX successfully delivered its first payload to the International Space Station last year, live streaming it all online.
Low Earth orbit will be more and more, as we progress into the 21st century, a realm of private sector activities.
So who are the men leading the charge?
Richard Branson, multi-billionaire. Paul Allen, multi-billionaire. Jeff Bezos, multi-billionaire. Larry Page, multi-billionaire. Elon Musk.
The Elon Musk, the Jeff Bezos, the Paul Allens, myself, the Diamandis, all of us who are in this cause right now, I believe, come from a place of hope and possibility.
Rick Tummelson is the CEO of Deep Space Industries, one of 2 asteroid mining companies in the U.S.
Several of us were sitting in the room. It was about 1986, 1987. We pledged our lives and fortunes to making the human breakout into space happen in our lifetimes. We called it the benevolent conspiracy. Well, that same group of people are still involved today, and we're making it happen.
What will tomorrow look like? Our world is at its limits, and yet we all want more. And why not? Why shouldn't the future be better than today?
But the prime directive of all these companies that you name seems to be profits. But the way you speak about it, it's like this,
no buck,
like higher.
No Buck Rogers. Nobody stays till somebody pays. It can be you, the taxpayer, and that's wonderful, and thank you very much. But the day that you get bored and turn away, nothing's going to happen after that. We have to figure out a way to make it profitable so that we can pay the bills.
Now, at the beginning of the 21st century, a space has been created for private companies to operate. The Commercial Space Launch Act, signed into law by Reagan in 1984, already allows private firms to launch into space. Today, the technology is there, and the U.S. government has been forced to slash federal budgets for NASA. Space is moving to a free market system. This is the age of private space exploration. But what will it look like when many of the companies are in the hands of a certain group of people?
But who owns those rocks? Who gives you the right to go out to those rocks?
Nobody owns those rocks.
But if you're taking this stuff, are you taking ownership of those rocks?
Look, there are people who will sit back and go, well, you have to share all of this with humanity, because, it's the common heritage of mankind. The best way I know to share wealth is the free enterprise system. It works.
There is this libertarian streak that runs through some of the new space community, no doubt. I contend that it goes back a long way. You see it beginning in about 1969, 1970 for the first time, in which people who are enthused by the Apollo program are disappointed at its ending. So you see that sort of thing taking place in the 70s, and it's kind of carried through and evolved over time, and there's still a strain of that that's present in lots of parts of the new space community.
But I think that all of these men have grown up to believe that the world, the solar system, the universe is theirs for the taking. This libertarian kind of thinking is all wound up with other uniquely American ideologies, this idea of manifest destiny, that it's our manifest destiny to conquer outer space, to exploit its resources, to colonize other planets.
Billionaires with designs on space rarely go on record, but one of them did return our calls.
I've met him very briefly a couple of times. He impressed me as a really Las Vegas kind of guy. He winked at me, and that seemed very 70s.
This particular space entrepreneur made his money from a terrestrial hotel chain, Budget Suites of America. It's turned its owner, Robert Bigelow, into a billionaire, and now he wants to take that personal fortune and put it toward launching the first hotel in space. Mr. Bigelow invited Fault Lines to visit his sprawling property. He has his own police force out here.
Yes, sir. If you kindly go over here to the office, I'll get you signed in and everything.
Okay. It's heavily guarded by his own armed security personnel. This is the tightest security I've ever experienced outside of a U.S. military base in Iraq. Bigelow Aerospace's unofficial logo and alien face is plastered throughout his property. He has spent millions investigating alien sightings.
If you do the homework, there's no way you can examine that topic and not be convinced that it's real, that ET is real. There's no way, especially if you have access to certain information and sources and so on, and I do.
These are the habitats that Bigelow Aerospace is developing. He currently has 2 test modules in orbit around the Earth. His next aim, to plant one of his inflatable hotels on the moon.
That's one interesting thing about volumes in space is that, you know, you have a lot more possibilities of the areas that you can use.
Sure. That's the sleeping quarters for 6 people.
Uh-huh, all the way around. So each one of those little cavities is for one person. Ultimately, maybe around 22 or 3, we might be ready to deploy this lunar base.
What gives you the right to have a lunar base, to put something on the moon?
So it's not as though there is a particular given right per se, as much as an opportunity.
I mean, it sounds like you're saying the moon is there for the taking, for whoever gets there.
Oh, I think it is. I think it definitely is. And I think there's a really interesting dynamic here going on about 10, 12 years out. Because I've talked about this in public, and I think that the moon is an enormously valuable asset, more direct to the value of the moon itself. Well, what can you bring home that has high value? Maybe it's helium-3, I don't know. People have talked about it for decades. There's large quantities there. There's no quantity of helium-3 here. It is difficult to extract. But I think that problem is probably solvable. And it offers the promise of a completely new energy source.
When it comes to government oversight, Bigelow isn't too concerned. In fact, he would prefer that the federal government stay out of his business. Sort of.
Our whole behavior and philosophy and everything is so diametrically opposite to Washington, D.C. in general. It's pathetic. That we don't want anything to do with Washington, D.C.
Well, speaking of NASA, when you say you don't want anything to do with D.C., but you signed a contract with NASA for like $18 million.
Being willing to criticize NASA or government in general doesn't make us stupid enough not to take the money when it's offered to us.
The rocket motor burns for a bit, and then it turns off, and the moment that it turns off, everything inside the ship will become weightless, right? So you'll be able to get out of your seat, unbuckle your seatbelt, float around the cabin, and then, you know, sort of come back in, and we'll ask people to get back in their seats, and you'll just do a glide using the wings of the vehicle down to the runway that you took off from.
Virgin Galactic, the space offshoot of British aerospace giant Virgin, plans to take customers for a ride into low Earth orbit to experience zero gravity. Flights are expected to begin this year. Leonardo DiCaprio and Justin Bieber are signed up as paying customers. Price for a ticket? $250,000. George Whitesides is Virgin Galactic's CEO.
We've got a carrier aircraft that brings the spaceship up to 50,000 feet, where it releases the spaceship. And the spaceship fires its rocket motor, makes a turn vertical, and you start heading up at Mach 3.
The construction began more than 6 years ago, and the cost were more than $200 million. No small feat, even for a billionaire. For Sir Richard Branson, the founder of the company, the inauguration of the spaceport was an occasion for champagne. But that could be because he's not paying for it.
He did not contribute a dime to the construction of this project.
How much has he given to the local community?
To my knowledge, absolutely nothing.
The spaceport was built here in Donna Ana County, one of the poorest counties and one of the poorest states in America. 25% of the people here live below the poverty line. Residents will be paying a sales tax for the next 15 years to cover their contribution to the building of the spaceport. And almost no one here can afford to take a ride in space.
The people that would be able to afford it would come in their own private jet, take their own limo, do their hour flight, take their limo back, and fly back home. I think it would just be, they'd come in, come out.
Now it's just there. It's a building that's out there. Nobody visits it. We don't, you know, I haven't even heard when the flights are going to start. You know, people are already paying for tickets. I don't see any money of that. You know, so it's just a waste.
Karen Perez is a former county commissioner for Doña Ana. She said that the county voted to approve the tax after being promised jobs.
They're hungry. They're looking for jobs. And again, these were jobs promised at all levels. This isn't high-tech, highfalutin jobs. These were real boots-on-the-ground types of jobs. Our governor promised us, we heard promises from anywhere from 1,500 to 5,000 new jobs associated with this endeavor. And we were excited about the construction. We have a lot of contractors here that do earthwork and concrete work and utility work, and we really had a lot of high hopes.
What happened?
None of that materialized.
Almost all of the construction contracts went to companies from Albuquerque or out of state. Human beings have always imagined different possibilities, different futures.
I take possession of this planet on behalf of all mankind.
A huge part of science fiction, which is sometimes called space opera, is about just the question of what will humans do in space, what kinds of civilizations will we create, how will humans be changed by space travel.
With private companies moving to the forefront of space travel in the hope of generating huge profits, it begs the question, was it really supposed to be this way?
The economics of the future is somewhat different.
Was humanity's quest for the stars ever supposed to be a business venture?
The acquisition of wealth is no longer the driving force in our lives.
You know, that's a way of imagining a humanity that has gotten beyond the kind of greed for resources that we have now. And on the other side of that, you get a dystopian future because you see both this kind of fear of military intervention tied to kind of corporate corruption. And we want to make sure that as these kinds of moves into space are happening, that our politics are keeping pace with them, and that we actually do have a lively public dialogue about that. And I think right now, that dialogue is taking place in the world of science fiction. And it needs to come out of that. I think we need to have people saying, this isn't just fiction, and stop pretending like this is just a fictional possibility. It's not. It's happening.
The Federal Aviation Administration is responsible for overseeing the safety of low Earth orbit flights and the content of the payload in the U.S. But when commercial space activities move beyond that sector of space, it becomes less clear who's in charge. The international treaties that exist are there to govern nations, not corporations.
Missions where the private sector does have a lot of capability, pushing more responsibility over to them, I think, is the right thing. It's something that NASA has now gotten more comfortable with as we go forward.
Are you concerned about the idea of exploitation beyond exploration? It seems like NASA does exploration, but a number of companies are looking at mining asteroids, mining on the moon, these types of activities. Does that concern?
More better.
Yeah.
I really.
Even the mining on the moon, there's no hesitation of like, wait a second, guys.
We don't own the moon. NASA doesn't feel any ownership over the moon, even though we were the first to get there, which was great and was a great accomplishment. But if people now want to do different things on the moon, that's great.
You know, the Outer Space Treaty was a product of its time and place. There were only two actors in space at that point, the United States and the Soviet Union. And the key provision in there is no property rights in space. Absent property rights, how can we engage in moon mining? Extraction. That's going to be an interesting question that has to be worked out. And there's lots of lawyers who deal with space law who've been debating this for years. But until there's actually a test case, it probably won't be resolved.
All of the international laws that we have and all the regulations we have about space exploration are designed for states. So we don't really have any laws or regulations in place for corporations.
You know, if we put too many rules in place right now that lead to us not being able to open space, I think it would be an obscenity. I think it is anti-life.
The most vocal supporters of a space free-for-all are the corporations and their billionaire backers. They insist it's not only their right to stake a claim in space, they're scratching a fundamental human itch. It may appear rather abstract, but 7 billion people back on Earth seem to have been locked out of an important conversation. One which over the long term could decide the model of how humans break the final frontier. The fear is that that model could be decided by a wealthy few.
It goes back to something more basic, that humans have an instinct to explore, to migrate, to expand their environment.
What we're looking at now, when we talk about opening the frontier, is more of a partnership, wherein the government takes the role of Lewis and Clark. They go over the hill, they go out into the plains, they look around, they tell us what they find, and then we open the frontier to the settlers and shopkeepers.
I wish there were a broader understanding of the way that this American ideology of exceptionalism and manifest destiny is so deeply embedded in the rhetoric of space exploration.
Many people have this kind of manifest destiny, canvas-covered wagons heading off to California, and it's a very positive sort of experience.
And I worry about the ability of the United States government, or U.S. companies for that matter, to build partnerships with other spacefaring nations when this way of thinking does not resonate, does not appeal to people living in other cultures.
It's happening right now. There are people walking around right now who will walk on Mars, who will walk on the moon, who will float in habitats in free space in worlds that were built by human beings right now.
Roger, go with Bravo.